Have you ever faced a moment when helping a stranger could cost you everything? On the Dakota frontier, Clara Dawson lived a quiet life, carving out a home in the wilderness her late father once tamed. But all of that changed the morning she found a wounded UIS, Marshal Ethan Callahan, collapsed beneath the pines with an arrow buried in his back. Saving him meant inviting death to her doorstep, because men like Silas Crowley, the ruthless bounty hunter chasing him, didn't forgive kindness. Clara had a choice. She could walk away and keep her homestead safe, or she could fight beside a stranger, knowing it would bring an army of killers to her door before dawn. What would you have done, standing in her boots, rifle in hand? As the first riders appeared through the morning mist, would you risk everything for justice and for a man you barely knew? This isn't just a story about bullets and blood. It's about courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that's born in fire. So saddle up, my friend. Like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts. And let's ride together into Clara's unforgettable story. What would you do if saving the life of a stranger meant putting your own in mortal peril? If mercy had to be chosen in the blink of an eye, knowing survival might slip away the very next moment. Our story tonight takes us to the Dakota frontier in 1882, a place where the law was often 3 days' ride away and justice came from the barrel of a gun. Here, in a land of whispering pines and shadows that could hide danger at every turn, a young woman would learn that doing the right thing could be the most dangerous choice of all. This is the tale of Clara Dawson, a 24-year-old homesteader who had built her own life from the unforgiving soil of the wilderness, and Ethan Callahan, a federal marshal whose pursuit of justice had painted a target on his back. Their paths crossed one blood-soaked evening deep in the backcountry, setting in motion a storm neither could have foreseen. In the Wild West, mercy was rarely offered, witnesses were seldom spared, and anyone who stood between corrupt men and their secrets rarely lived to tell the tale. Clara Dawson had always believed that true character revealed itself not in comfort, but in the hardest of choices. She was about to face the greatest test of her life. Picture this: a young woman alone at her cabin, splitting firewood as the chill of October seeped through the trees. She pauses when she hears something foreign to the wilderness, the strained groan of a man in agony. Following the sound into the forest, she stumbles upon a marshal, an arrow buried in his back, bleeding into the autumn leaves. The sensible thing would be to walk away, to protect her quiet solitude, to pretend she had never heard his cries. But Clara Dawson does not take the easy road. She hauls the wounded lawman back to her cabin, tends to his injuries, and in that single act, signs away her safety. For the men who are hunting him are no common outlaws. They are bounty hunters turned corrupt, led by Silas Crowley, and they will kill anyone who stands between them and their prize. What follows is a night of terror, of choices made in a heartbeat, of courage found in unexpected places, and a battle that will decide not only who survives the dawn, but what justice truly means in a land without law. Clara's story begins on that fateful October evening when her axe bit deep into pine wood and fate whispered her name through the trees. The autumn wind carried the warning of winter across the clearing as Clara Dawson swung her axe high, the blade flashing in the fading sun before cracking through the log at her feet. She wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at the growing pile of wood stacked neatly by her cabin wall. She had been working since daybreak, her hands hardened by years of labor, knowing survival here depended on staying ahead of the season's cruelty. The Dawson homestead sat in a natural meadow, ringed by Douglas firs that towered like cathedral spires. Isolated, yes, but chosen. Clara had built this life after her father, Judge Horace Dawson, passed on 4 years earlier. He had been a circuit judge before turning to farming, and he taught his daughter that independence was worth more than gold and twice as hard to earn. Her cabin was sturdy, built with her own hands from the very trees that loomed over it. Every log, every stone in the foundation was set by her. The nearest neighbor was a day's ride away, and the closest settlement, a scattering of shacks and a trading post, lay 3 days south, across treacherous mountain passes. She preferred it this way. Out here, a person's worth was measured not by wealth or name, but by their grit, their will to endure, and their ability to stand tall when life tried to break them. By all counts, Clara Dawson had proven herself capable. Then it came, a sound that didn't belong. A low groan carried through the trees, not the wind sighing through the pines, not the creak of timber. Clara froze, every sense sharpened, her green eyes scanning the tree line. Living alone this far from civilization had taught her to trust her instincts, and those instincts told her that something was terribly wrong. Living alone on the far edge of the Dakota frontier had taught Clara Dawson to trust her instincts more than anything else, and tonight, every instinct in her body screamed that something was terribly wrong. She froze, the axe still in her hand, her muscles tense as her ears strained for the sound again. There it was, fainter this time, broken, like the cry of someone too weak to call out for help. It came from the woods behind her cabin, from a place no friendly soul had any reason to be. Clara's chest tightened with a pang of unexpected sympathy. That sound was not the howl of a wolf or the call of some wandering drifter. It was the sound of a human being slipping closer to death. She laid the axe down carefully and reached for the Winchester rifle leaning against the chopping block. The rifle was clean, oiled, and loaded. Out here, she had learned young that the only thing more dangerous than carrying a weapon was not carrying one. With the rifle cradled in her hands, Clara moved through the trees like someone who had spent years walking this wilderness. Her steps were quiet, her breathing steady, her green eyes flicking left and right, alert for movement. Autumn had painted the forest in crimson and gold, the leaves forming a soft carpet under her boots. Somewhere above her, a hawk wheeled lazily in the gray sky. She could hear the faint chatter of squirrels busy with their winter stores. It was almost peaceful, almost ordinary until she saw him. The man lay sprawled face down among the leaves, his dark hair matted with dried blood. An arrow jutted from his back, its shaft decorated with eagle feathers that trembled with each shallow breath. His shirt, once white, was soaked through with red, and the leather vest he wore bore the marks of a man accustomed to both travel and danger. A silver badge half buried in the dirt caught the fading light. Clara's heart sank as she brushed the dirt away and read the engraving, U.S. Marshal. Federal marshals did not end up bleeding out in the backcountry by chance. Someone had put him here, and whoever had loosed that arrow might still be near, waiting to finish what they started. Clara lifted the rifle to her shoulder and inched forward, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The man could have been anyone, an outlaw who stole the badge, a corrupt marshal finally paying for his crimes. He was trouble. Of that she had no doubt. But when she crouched beside him and saw his face, pale and drawn with pain, something inside her softened. He looked young, perhaps 30, strong features, the kind that spoke of grit and honesty rather than cruelty. Even in his agony there was a dignity about him, something that reminded her of her father, Judge Horace Dawson, back when he rode the circuit dispensing justice across the frontier. This man had the look of someone who stood for something larger than himself. "Mister," Clara whispered, her voice barely above the sigh of the wind. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. brown eyes, clouded with pain but still sharp, locked onto hers. Relief washed across his face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For a long moment neither spoke, caught in that fragile connection between life and death. Finally his lips moved. "Ma'am," he rasped, his voice ragged. "Thank God. I thought I was going to die out here alone." Clara's mind raced. The arrow was deep, and the blood loss was bad. Fever already glistened on his brow. He was dying, no question about it. The safe thing to do was leave him there, go back to her cabin, bar the door, and forget she ever heard his cries. It was the smart choice, the choice that meant survival. But Clara Dawson had never been one to choose the easy road. She slung the rifle across her back and leaned close enough that he could hear the iron in her voice. "You're not going to die," she said firmly. "Not while I'm here." The man's eyes widened, a flicker of hope, or maybe fear passing through them. He swallowed hard, wincing with the effort. "Ma'am, you don't understand. They tried to kill me. The men who did this, they'll come back. If they find you helping me, then we'll just make sure they don't find us." Clara cut him off, her hands already working. Years of living alone had taught her to improvise. She quickly gathered branches and rope from her pack, fashioning a rough travois. "What's your name?" "Marshal Ethan," he managed to whisper. "Ethan Callahan. And you need to know saving me might just get you killed." Clara's eyes met his steadily as she tightened the knots. "Name's Clara Dawson. I've been keeping myself alive out here for 4 years. I reckon I can handle whatever trouble you brought with you." She spoke the words with conviction, but inside she knew the truth. Her decision tonight had already written a death warrant in her name. Somewhere out there, men were following his blood trail, and when they arrived, they wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone standing in their way. Dragging him was brutal work. Every groan that escaped his lips cut at her like a blade. But leaving him was not an option. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in shades of fire and smoke. By the time she began hauling him back toward her cabin, the light was fading fast. Behind them, the forest grew quiet. Too quiet. It was the silence of hunters closing in. And Clara Dawson knew the real fight hadn't even begun. Darkness was coming to the Dakota wilderness, and with it the men who wanted Marshal Ethan Callahan dead. Clara Dawson worked with desperate efficiency, her fingers raw as she lashed pine branches together with rope. The makeshift travois had to hold, because there was no other way to move him. Each groan that escaped Ethan Callahan's throat as she dragged him over roots and stones tore at her. The smart thing would have been to leave him where he'd fallen, let the forest claim him. But Clara had never walked away from someone in need, and she wasn't about to start now. The journey back to her cabin stretched out like an eternity, though it could not have been more than 20 minutes. Every step was a battle. Ethan slipped in and out of consciousness, muttering fragments about treachery, lawmen who had sold their souls, and a conspiracy too tangled for Clara to untangle in that moment. His words were slurred, but his fear was real. By the time she wrestled him through the door and lowered him onto her narrow bed, his face had turned the color of ash. The arrow had sunk deep, missing his heart and lungs by inches, but the damage was enough to kill him if she did nothing. Clara had patched up wounds before broken bones from a fall, cuts from a plow blade, even the gash of a wildcat's claw, but never this, never a barbed arrow driven into a man's back while killers prowled the woods outside. She lit every lamp and candle she owned until the cabin glowed like a beacon in the darkening wilderness. Her voice was steady, though her stomach twisted I've got to take this arrow out. If it stays, you'll die for certain. It's going to hurt worse than anything you've known." Ethan's eyes found hers through the haze of fever. It took all his strength just to nod. "Do it," he rasped. His breath rattled like dry leaves in the wind. Then, before she could begin, he clutched her arm with surprising force. "But you need to know. They're coming for me." Clara steadied the knife in her hand, the blade sterilized in the flame. His words came in gasps, each syllable an effort. "Bounty hunters, crooked ones. They've thrown in with the Iron Fang gang. I found their camp, saw them plotting to hit a bank in Silverton. They tried to silence me with that arrow before I could bring word to the governor." Clara's hand paused as she cut away his blood-soaked shirt. The Iron Fangs. She'd heard of them in hushed tones around trading posts. A band of ruthless killers who always seemed one step ahead of justice. If corrupt lawmen were giving them cover, it explained everything: their escapes, their precision. "How many are on your trail?" she asked. Though her voice was calm, her heart was hammering. 5, maybe 6, he whispered. "Led by Silas Crowley. I sent him to prison years ago for taking bribes off cattle thieves. He swore he'd see me dead." The name made Clara's blood run cold. She knew it. Everyone did. Crowley had once worn a badge, but he twisted it into a shield for crime. Men like him didn't forget grudges. "How long before they find this place?" she asked. "By dawn. Maybe sooner. They'll follow the blood I left behind." He tried to push himself up, but collapsed back with a strangled cry. "Ride now. Save yourself? I'm done for anyway." Clara's eyes hardened as she glanced out the window at the fading glow of sunset. 8 hours at best. Nowhere near enough time for him to mend. Probably not even enough for him to keep his wits through what she was about to do. But she had made her choice when she lifted him out of those leaves. Running wasn't in her nature. "Then we best get started," she said, gripping her knife with renewed resolve. What followed was an hour of torment. The arrow was barbed, designed to tear as it came out. Clara worked with painstaking care, cutting tissue away from the cruel metal. Ethan bit down on a strip of leather, his muffled groans filling the cabin as sweat poured down his face. Clara's hands shook, but she forced herself to steady, whispering encouragement. "You're doing fine. Just a little longer." At last the arrowhead slid free, bloodied and wicked in the lamplight. Clara dropped it into the fire, watching it hiss and blacken. Then she stitched the wound closed with the same careful precision her father had once demanded of her when she learned to sew. Judge Horace Dawson had always said a frontier woman needed to know more than how to keep a home. She had to be ready to save a life. Tonight, those lessons kept Ethan breathing. When it was over, he lay unconscious but alive, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Clara bound the wound in clean cloth, her arms trembling, her dress stained dark with his blood. She sank back in her chair, exhaustion threatening to overtake her. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. She had to know who exactly she was throwing her life into danger for. She searched his belongings with a methodical hand. What she found froze her blood. His marshal's commission, signed by the governor himself, and tucked inside a leather portfolio papers, dozens of them. She spread them across her table by the lamplight, scanning line after line, names, dates, amounts of money exchanged, records of robberies that had been allowed to succeed. It was all there, a network of corruption stretching across the Dakota frontier. Sheriffs, judges, even territorial representatives taking their cut while the Iron Fang gang robbed and murdered unchecked. Silas Crowley wasn't just some bitter outlaw chasing revenge. He was part of a machine, one that would crush anyone who threatened to expose it. Clara set the papers aside, her jaw tight. She glanced at Ethan, pale but breathing, and felt a swell of grim determination. This man wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for justice in a land that had nearly forgotten the word. And now, by saving him, Clara Dawson had joined that fight whether she wanted to or not. The papers Clara spread across the table painted a picture darker than any outlaw tale whispered in saloons. It wasn't just a handful of crooked men. It was a network judges, sheriffs, businessmen, even politicians lining their pockets by selling out the very people they were sworn to protect. The scheme ran with ruthless precision. Crooked lawmen collected bounties for catching criminals, only to arrange their escape so they could strike again. They tipped gangs off to raids, betrayed honest marshals, and split the spoils 3 ways between the outlaws, the officials, and the so-called bounty hunters who kept the machine turning. Ethan Callahan had been chasing the truth for months, and here it was, spread across Clara Dawson's kitchen table like a map of corruption, names, dates, sums of money, even records of robberies deliberately allowed to succeed. Enough evidence to hang a dozen men, enough to send twice that many to prison. And Silas Crowley would kill without hesitation to make sure those documents never saw daylight in Washington. Clara pushed the papers aside and began checking her weapons with a grim sense of purpose. Her Winchester rifle gleamed, the barrel well-oiled. A double-barreled shotgun leaned against the wall, heavy but reliable. 2 Colt revolvers rested in their holsters, ready to be drawn at a heartbeat's notice. Boxes of ammunition sat stacked neatly, the fruit of years of careful preparation. Her cabin was no ordinary homestead either. Built from thick logs, it could turn most bullets. The windows were small, easy to cover. Only 2 doors faced the world outside, both reinforced, both within sight of one another. After Dakota raiders had passed through the region the previous year, she had stocked her cellar with dried food, fresh water, and even dug a root cellar that could serve as a hiding hole. She hadn't expected to use it again so soon. As she moved through the lamplight, setting firing positions and checking sight lines, her gaze kept drifting to the man sleeping fitfully on her bed. Ethan Callahan wasn't just another lawman with a badge. He had risked everything, his career, his life, to bring the truth to light. He reminded her of her father, Judge Horace Dawson, a man who had never once backed down when principle demanded courage. But there was something more, something harder for Clara to admit to herself. The way Ethan had looked at her when she promised to save him, not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect, as if he had known from the first glance that she was capable, equal, unyielding. Few men had ever seen her that way. A sound outside cut her thoughts short. A horse whinnied in the distance, answered by another from the opposite side of her homestead. Clara's hand froze on the shotgun. Slowly, she blew out most of the lamps, letting shadows reclaim the room. Then she eased to the window and peered through a crack in the shutters. They were out there, at least 3 mounted shapes sliding between the trees, circling her cabin like wolves preparing to strike. Her pulse quickened, but her hands were steady as she gripped the shotgun and took position by the door. Behind her, Ethan tossed restlessly, fever making him mutter about betrayal and treachery. He was no use in a fight. That meant it all rested on her shoulders. Then came the voice, smooth, confident, and deadly as a rattler's hiss. "Marshal Callahan, I know you're in there. Boy, why don't you come on out, and we'll settle this like civilized men." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. Silas Crowley. She could hear the smirk in his tone. the certainty of a man who believed he had every advantage. He was wrong. "This is my land," Clara called back, her voice sharp as flint. "You and your kind best move along before I scatter you into the dirt." Laughter floated back through the night air, cruel and mocking. Crowley's voice carried easily, slick as whiskey, poisonous as the lies he'd lived on. "Well now, boys, looks like the Marshal found himself a guardian angel. That makes things a mite more interesting, don't it?" Clara risked another glance. Shadows moved among the pines. 4 men, maybe 5. They spread wide, circling to cut off any escape. These weren't green recruits. They moved like men who had hunted before, men who knew how to lay siege. Behind her, Ethan stirred. His eyes cracked open, fever-bright and filled with warning. "Clara," he whispered hoarsely, "you don't understand. They won't just kill me. They'll kill you too. Make it look like Sioux raiders hit this place. No one will ever know the truth." Clara cocked the shotgun with a grim smile. "Then they'll be disappointed. I've been living on the Dakota frontier for 4 years. Surviving predators, whether beast or man, comes natural by now. From the shadows." Crowley rode closer, and at last she saw him. A big man with iron-gray hair and features that might have been handsome once, before corruption carved them hard. He sat tall in the saddle, reins loose in his hand. Every inch a man who had grown used to being feared. "Now listen here, miss," he called, voice suddenly adopting a false courtesy. "We're federal bounty hunters, sworn to the law. That man you've got in there is wanted for treason. You hand him over, and we'll be on our way. You'll even have our thanks." Clara almost laughed. She'd seen snakes play the same game, luring prey closer before striking. Crowley might wear the guise of law, but the truth was written plain in the way his men slinked through the trees with rifles ready. Her grip tightened on the shotgun, her jaw set. "You picked the wrong cabin. Crowley, if it's a fight you want, then a fight you'll get." The night went still for a moment, silence thick as wet wool. Then Crowley's laughter rang out again, colder than the prairie wind. The siege had begun. "That man in your cabin is wanted for murder and robbery," Silas Crowley called, his voice smooth as a practiced liar's. "Hand him over, and we'll ride away peaceful-like." Clara Dawson had lived too long on the Dakota frontier to be fooled by words dressed up as truth. She leaned closer to the door, her voice sharp as a knife. "Funny thing about liars, mister. They always think the rest of us are fools. I've seen Marshal Callahan's papers. I know who he is, and I know what he's fighting against." Silence fell outside, heavy and dangerous. When Crowley finally spoke again, the mask was gone, stripped away to reveal raw menace. "Then you've signed your own death warrant. Woman, neither of you leaves this place alive." Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. She had been ready for this since sundown. The cabin was fortified, the water barrels filled, the ammunition counted and stacked. Every supply had been shifted away from the windows, every weak spot reinforced. She knew this fight would come. "They'll try to burn us out first," Ethan Callahan muttered from the bed, his face gray with pain as he fought to sit upright. "Let them try," Clara answered, nodding toward the metal sheets she had nailed to the roof the spring before, after lightning nearly destroyed her home. "This place won't burn easy. The attack came fast." A rifle cracked, and glass and splinters exploded beside Clara's head. She dropped low, swung her shotgun toward the flash outside, and fired. The boom rolled through the night, and a strangled cry followed. One down. Ethan had dragged himself upright against the headboard, revolver in hand. His fevered face was pale, but his hand was steady when he squeezed off a shot through the bedroom window. A second shout of pain echoed from the trees. "That makes two," Clara called, thumbing shells into the shotgun with practiced speed. "How many more you want to lose?" "Crowley." The answer came in lead. Gunfire erupted from all sides, bullets thudding into the thick logs, rattling the shutters. Clara and Ethan moved low and fast, ducking between their firing positions, answering shot with shot. The fight became a rhythm, short bursts of gunfire, silence, the scrape of reloads. Twice the bounty hunters tried to rush the door, and twice Clara's deadly aim and Ethan's careful shots drove them back. Blood marked the snow outside, but still they pressed on. As the hours bled away, Clara understood the truth of the fight. Crowley's men were professionals, yes, but they were used to easy prey. Farmers, shopkeepers, families too terrified to resist. They hadn't expected a woman who had carved a life out of this wild country, nor a marshal who refused to die quietly. "You're running low," Ethan warned during a lull, counting the dwindling shells with a soldier's eye. His voice was stronger now, the fever tempered by sheer survival. Clara checked her supplies. He was right. 24 rounds, no more. Crowley's men had plenty they could afford to waste shots. She could not. "Then every bullet counts," she said grimly. At the kitchen window, she spotted movement, a figure creeping from the tree line. Torch in hand, she steadied her rifle, squeezed the trigger, and the man spun sideways, the burning branch tumbling harmless into the dirt. "Fine shot," Ethan said, pride in his voice. "My father taught me," Clara replied. "Reloading," said a woman living alone, needed to be twice as good with a gun as any man. The night stretched on, long and merciless. The hunters grew restless. Clara heard their whispers between the bursts of gunfire. "Too long," one of them muttered. "Somebody's bound to hear. Near a soul's a day's ride," Crowley snarled back. "But you're right. We finish this now." Clara's gut twisted at his tone. Desperation made men reckless, and reckless men were dangerous. The fire came before dawn. Arrows tipped with burning rags arced through the sky, streaks of orange against the paling night. Most clattered harmless off the metal roof, but one buried itself in the shutter of the bedroom. Clara lunged with a bucket, dousing the flames before they spread. The message was clear. Crowley was willing to burn them alive, evidence and all. "We can't hold forever," Ethan admitted, loading the last cartridges into his revolver. His voice was raw but steady. "They'll grind us down, bit by bit." Clara looked at him, sweat plastering his dark hair to his forehead, skin pale from blood loss, but eyes burning with determination. A good man, an honest marshal, standing against corruption even as it tried to tear him apart. He deserved better than dying in an isolated cabin on the Dakota frontier. And, to her own surprise, Clara realized she cared not just as protector, but as a woman drawn to his courage, to the respect he had shown her from the first. She gripped his shoulder, her voice steady. "Then we don't let them grind us down. We fight till there's no fight left in us. If this cabin falls, it won't fall easy." Ethan met her gaze, pain shadowing his features, but a faint smile flickering there too. "Then let's make them pay for every inch." Outside, the hunters regrouped, their voices carrying in the cold air. Clara could hear Crowley barking orders, the steel in his tone promising one final assault. The sky was paling toward dawn, streaks of red across the horizon. The night had been theirs, but the day would bring the reckoning. There was something between them now, forged in blood and gunpowder, tempered by shared danger and the unspoken bond of mutual trust. Clara Dawson leaned against the windowsill, eyes hard, voice steady. Then we make our stand count. Your evidence has to reach the federal authorities. Ethan, that's worth fighting for. The first streaks of dawn cut through the trees, cold and colorless. From the edge of the clearing came the bellowing voice of Silas Crowley, commanding and venomous all at once. Last chance, folks. Come out with your hands up, and I'll promise you a quick death. Clara glanced back at Ethan Callahan. Despite the blood loss and the fever that still clung to him, there was no hesitation in his eyes, only the same hard resolve she felt burning in her chest. She drew a breath, squared her shoulders, and shouted back, "Come and take us." The clearing fell silent for a heartbeat, as if even the forest held its breath. Both sides knew the final battle was at hand. The gray light of dawn revealed the toll of the long night. 2 of Crowley's men lay sprawled lifeless near the cabin, their bodies half covered in frost. Blood trails showed where others had dragged their wounded into the woods, but Clara took no comfort from the sight. Crowley was not a man who gave up after a few losses. "They're regrouping," Ethan muttered, leaning against the bedroom doorway, one hand pressed against the bandage on his side. His voice was low, but steady. "Crowley won't underestimate us again." Clara fed shells into her shotgun with deliberate care. "Then we'd better not underestimate him either." The cabin was scarred, its windows shattered, its walls pocked with lead. They had maybe 20 rounds left between them. Clara felt exhaustion creeping in her arms heavy, her body aching, but she forced the fatigue aside. Survival had never been about comfort out here. It was about will. "How many men do you think he started with?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the tree line. "At least 8, maybe 10, Ethan replied grimly. Crowley never hunted dangerous prey without a full crew. After last night, he knows we're both dangerous. The distant drumming of hooves confirmed his words. Clara's gut clenched as 6 mounted riders emerged from the pines, sunlight glinting off polished rifles. These weren't the ragged bounty hunters from the night before. They moved like soldiers, tight and disciplined. "Fresh men," Clara whispered, her heart sinking, rested, armed, and eager for payback. At their head rode Silas Crowley himself. Clara saw him clearly for the first time in the pale morning light. He was broad-shouldered, his frame still powerful despite his years. His face bore the weathering of countless winters, but it was his eyes that froze her blood pale, pitiless, the eyes of a man who had long ago sold his soul. Crowley raised one hand, and his men spread into a wide circle, just beyond rifle range. They dismounted in perfect unison, taking cover with the confidence of men who had done this 100 times before. Marshal Callahan Crowley's voice rang across the clearing. "Miss Dawson, time we had ourselves a civilized conversation." Clara shot a glance at Ethan, who shook his head ever so slightly. They both knew Crowley's kind of conversation was nothing but a lure. "Still," Clara called back, her voice level, "we're listening." Crowley chuckled, the sound dry and hollow. "You've caused me considerable trouble. Cost me good men. But I'm a businessman first, and I prefer to settle disputes peacefully when I can." "What kind of settlement?" Ethan demanded, his revolver resting in his lap, though his finger hovered near the trigger. "A simple one," Crowley said smoothly. "You come out, Marshal, with your hands up and all that evidence you've been gathering. Do that, and I'll make sure Miss Dawson doesn't suffer for her troubles. Quick bullet, very humane." Clara's hands tightened around the shotgun. Her blood boiled at the mockery in his words. She shouted back, "And if we refuse?" "Well, then things get unpleasant," Crowley said, his tone almost cheerful. "I've got time, I've got men, and I've got supplies. You're trapped in there, running low on ammunition. Time's on my side," as if to drive the point home. His men began setting up camp at the edges of the clearing, unpacking food, stacking ammunition, tying their horses where they could graze. They were preparing to wait as long as it took. Ethan's face darkened. "He's right," he whispered. "We can't outlast a siege. We'll have to break out or find another way." Clara scanned the tree line. Every escape route was already covered. Even if they tried, the fresh horses and steady rifles outside would cut them down before they reached the woods. Then Crowley's voice carried again, louder, sharper. "And there's something else. Miss Dawson, I've been asking around. You're Judge Horace Dawson's daughter, ain't you? Your daddy sent a lot of good men to prison. Some of them were friends of mine." Clara froze, bile rising in her throat. The name of her father, spoken by that viper's tongue, cut deeper than any bullet. Ethan's gaze met hers. He saw the shock, the anger, and the fear. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Clara, he's trying to rattle you. Don't let him." She forced her breath steady, her hands tight on the shotgun. Crowley might know her bloodline, but he didn't know her heart. Her father had taught her that law was only as strong as the people who defended it. And right now, with dawn rising cold and merciless, Clara Dawson intended to defend it with her life. Silas Crowley had done his homework. This wasn't just about silencing Ethan Callahan anymore. This had become personal. His voice, sharp with cruelty, rolled across the clearing. "That's right. This ain't just about a troublesome marshal poking his nose where it don't belong. This is about settling old scores. Your daddy cost me money. Miss Dawson cost me men, too. Time's come to balance the books." The words struck like blows. Clara Dawson felt the weight of her father's name pressing on her shoulders. Judge Horace Dawson had been a beacon of honesty in a corrupt land, a man who sent more than a few outlaws to prison and to the gallows. Now she was paying the price for his integrity. "Don't let him inside your head," Ethan said softly from his place near the bedroom window. His voice was calm, but firm. "That's what he wants, to make you doubt yourself, to make you scared." But Clara wasn't scared. She was furious at Crowley for twisting the law her father had served faithfully, furious at the broken system that let men like him prosper, and angriest of all at herself for not foreseeing the trap they were now caught in. "You want to settle scores," she shouted, her voice carrying like steel over the frozen clearing. "Then come face me yourself. Crowley, stop hiding behind your men." Crowley's laughter cut the morning like a knife. "Oh, I intend to, little lady. But not yet. First I'll let fear do my work. Fear eats a person alive, makes him jump at shadows. When you're good and spooked, that's when I'll come for you, true to his word." Crowley settled into a patient siege. His men rotated on watch, some resting, some eating, others cleaning rifles and checking pistols. They were professionals, Claire realized. This wasn't their first time tightening a noose around prey. By mid-morning, the psychological pressure began to gnaw at her. Every creak of the log walls sounded like a footstep. Every whisper of wind through the pines felt like a warning. She caught herself pacing, spinning at the smallest sound, finger tight on the trigger of her shotgun. "He's good at this," Ethan observed, watching her from the shadows. "Psychological warfare. Sometimes fear works faster than bullets." "I know what he's doing," Clara snapped before she could stop herself. The sharpness in her tone stung. Ethan didn't flinch, but guilt washed over her. He was trying to help. and she'd turned her frustration on him. Around midday, Crowley tried a new trick. One of his men crept forward under a white flag, laying a bundle just outside rifle range before retreating. "Got a little gift for you, Miss Dawson," Crowley called. "Thought you'd like to see what happens to folks who take up with federal marshals." Clara's stomach turned as she stared at the bundle. Bloodied clothes, scattered personal effects, and on top, a tarnished badge. She recognized the engraving Deputy Marshal Thomas Reed, Ethan's partner. Ethan's face drained of color, grief etched into every line. "I sent him to chase a lead in Red Bluff. He never came back." His voice cracked. Crowley got to him first. "The message couldn't have been clearer. Oppose Crowley's network, and you end up in a shallow grave." But instead of breaking her, the sight hardened Clara's resolve. Her fear burned away, replaced by the same cold determination she'd seen in her father's eyes on the day he'd sent a dozen guilty men to prison, despite threats against his life. "He made a mistake," she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara turned to him. In her green eyes burned something fierce and unshakable. Not fear, not desperation, but the calm of a predator about to strike. "He thinks fear will break us, but all he's done is remind me why we're fighting. Thomas Reed didn't die for nothing. Ethan, and neither will we." Outside, Crowley was growing restless. His psychological games had failed, and time was slipping. The afternoon sun hung low when Clara spotted him rallying his men, their voices sharp with frustration. "He's done waiting," Ethan murmured. His strength had returned enough that he could steady a rifle, and though he was pale, his eyes gleamed with resolve. Clara counted quickly. 8 men in total, posted at key points. They had the cabin surrounded. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but the wilderness had taught her that survival wasn't always about strength. Sometimes it was about who was willing to endure longer, fight harder, strike sharper. "When they come, they'll hit us from every side," she said, checking her ammunition one last time. Her supplies were down to scraps a handful of shells for the Winchester, 8 for the shotgun, 12 bullets for her father's old Colt. It wasn't much, but she'd learned long ago that the will to stand could be worth more than a full arsenal. Ethan managed a grim smile. "Then we make every shot count." Clara nodded, her jaw set. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her father's name, for Thomas Reed's sacrifice, and for Ethan Callahan, who carried the truth that could topple half the corruption in the Dakota frontier. And when Silas Crowley finally came for them, she intended to make him regret ever underestimating a judge's daughter. Not much to hold off 8 professional killers, but it would have to be enough. "Clara," Ethan said quietly, and something in his voice made her glance his way. His face was pale, lined with pain, but his eyes burned steady. "If we don't make it through this, I want you to know, meeting you, having you save my life, it's been an honor. You're the bravest soul I've ever known." Heat rose in Clara Dawson's cheeks, but she met his gaze without wavering. "Save the speeches for when we're still breathing. Marshal, we're not dead yet." The words came out steady, but inside she felt the weight of the moment settle like a shroud. This wasn't like the chaos of the night raid. That confusion had given them an edge. What was coming now was a coordinated assault by seasoned men who had learned from their mistakes. Silas Crowley's voice boomed from the trees one final time. "Last chance. Folks, come out now, and I'll make it quick." Clara lifted her Winchester, sighted the massive trunk where Crowley stood, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet slapped into the bark inches from his head. Her answer was clear: no surrender, no bargain, no mercy. "So be it," Crowley roared, diving for cover. "Take them alive if you can, but take them." The attack came like a hammer blow, 3 directions at once. 2 men charged the front. Another pair circled toward the back door, while a 5th laid down covering fire from the tree line. But Clara Dawson was not most defenders. Her first shot dropped the lead attacker, the .44-40 slug spinning him into the dirt. She worked the bolt smoothly and fired again, clipping the second man in the shoulder. He yelped and dove behind her woodpile. From behind her, Ethan's revolver cracked twice. Despite his injuries, his hands were steady. One of the men at the back door went down hard, clutching his chest, while the other stumbled back with a curse. "They're trying to flank us left," Clara shouted, catching movement through the trees. She dropped the Winchester and grabbed her shotgun. A rifle round splintered the window frame. Then another punched through the log wall. The marksman in the trees was too good. "Cover me," she yelled to Ethan. Then she did the last thing anyone expected. Clara Dawson kicked open the front door and charged into the open, with her shotgun blazing. The sheer audacity of it stunned Crowley's men. While they scrambled, she rolled low, came up firing, and put a load of buckshot into the wounded man behind her woodpile. His body collapsed in the dirt. Bullets whined around her as she sprinted toward the lean-to where her horse was tied. Another man rounded the corner with his rifle raised, but Clara was faster. Her shotgun boomed, and he crumpled, weapon flying from his hands. Inside the cabin, Ethan's revolver kept barking deliberate, careful shots that kept the rest pinned. "Where is she?" Crowley's furious voice rang through the pines. "Find that woman." Clara reloaded quickly, a grim smile tugging her lips. Crowley was losing control, and angry men made mistakes. By her count, at least 4 of his men were down, maybe 5. That left 3, plus Crowley himself. A shadow passed the edge of the lean-to. Clara waited, steady as stone, until she saw boots. She pulled both triggers. Buckshot tore into the man's legs, and he collapsed, screaming. She didn't wait to finish him. She was already moving, sprinting back to the cabin. "Clara," Ethan called, his voice sharp. 2 more at the back. She burst through the rear door to see them prying at the window. Her Winchester barked twice, and both men fell back, the first collapsing instantly, the other staggering with blood streaming from his arm. "How many left?" Ethan asked, reloading his revolver with trembling hands. Crowley. "Maybe 1 more," Clara said, checking her own dwindling rounds. Her fingers brushed the last cartridges in her belt. This fight was going to end soon, one way or another. Silas Crowley's voice came closer now, deep and furious. "Clara Dawson, you've cost me 6 good men. This ain't business anymore. It's personal." Good Clara shouted back, chambering another round. "Personal means you'll make mistakes." And he did. Crowley appeared at the edge of the clearing, rifle clutched carelessly in his rage. Clara's Winchester cracked, and he spun, clutching his left arm where her bullet tore through flesh. "You'll pay for that," he snarled. Diving behind a fallen log, Clara darted sideways, using the smoke from her rifle to mask her movement. Ethan's revolver snapped again and again, his shots keeping Crowley's last gunman pinned down. The balance had shifted. Clara was no longer just defending. She was hunting. She slid through the underbrush, circling wide, eyes locked on the log where Crowley hid. Her breath came steady, each step measured, each muscle taut with purpose. She could hear his ragged curses, the frantic scramble of a wounded man who suddenly realized his power was slipping. Ethan's voice carried faintly from the cabin. "Clara, finish it." And she intended to. The next few minutes turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse among the tall pines surrounding the cabin. Clara Dawson moved like a ghost, every step placed with the same care her father had taught her while hunting deer in the Dakota frontier. Silas Crowley and the last of his hired guns prowled through the underbrush. Certain she was still holed up in the battered cabin, they were wrong. She found the first man crouched behind a tree, his rifle aimed toward the cabin windows. His entire focus was on Ethan inside, waiting for movement. Clara's knife slid into his side before he ever sensed her presence. He gasped once, then went still, his body dropping silently into the pine needles. The second gunman spun at the sound, quick and wary. His eyes searched for a woman with a rifle, not one who had already slipped close enough to draw her father's old Colt. Clara raised the revolver and fired twice into his chest. The man staggered backward and collapsed before he could call a warning. That left only Silas Crowley. She found him crouched exactly where she expected, behind the fallen log near the clearing, his rifle leveled at the cabin. He was waiting for her or Ethan to show themselves at a window. He never even heard her until the cold steel of her rifle pressed against the back of his neck. "Drop it, Crowley." He froze, his big hands tightening around the rifle stock for a heartbeat before common sense won out. The weapon fell to the ground with a thud that echoed through the sudden stillness. "Turn around." Slowly. He did, pale eyes locking on hers with the desperate calculation of a man staring down death. But what he saw there, steel resolve, no fear, no doubt made him take an involuntary step back. "You killed them all," he muttered, half admiring, half horrified. 8 professional killers, and you dropped them one by one. They made it personal when they murdered Deputy Marshal Thomas Reed, Clara said coldly. And when you threatened me because of what my father stood for, Judge Horace Dawson was a good man. You're nothing but a butcher hiding behind a badge. Crowley's right hand twitched toward the pistol on his hip. Clara's rifle didn't so much as waver. "I wouldn't," she said evenly. "You're not going to shoot me in cold blood," Crowley sneered, though his voice carried a note of doubt. "You're not a killer. Clara Dawson. You're your father's daughter. Good people don't execute their enemies." For a moment, Clara considered his words. Then she nodded slightly. "You're right. I'm not going to execute you." Hope flickered in his eyes until she raised her voice. "Ethan, come on out here. I've got something for you." Ethan Callahan stepped carefully out of the cabin, revolver in hand, his face pale but steady. His smile was grim. Silas Crowley. Been waiting for this moment. Crowley's face drained of color as realization set in. "Callahan, I should have killed you when I had the chance." "Yes, you should have," Ethan agreed. "But you made the same mistake most bullies make. You underestimated the people you tried to scare." While Clara kept her rifle trained. Ethan pulled a set of iron cuffs from his gear. Crowley didn't resist when the steel closed around his wrists. He was professional enough to recognize when a fight was truly lost. "Your whole network is finished, Crowley," Ethan said, tightening the chains. "I've got enough evidence to bring down every corrupt official from Silverton to Red Bluff. The federal authorities are going to clean house, and it starts with you." Crowley glanced at the bodies scattered across the clearing, then back at Clara with something almost like respect. "You fight like wildfire," he said hoarsely. "Your daddy would be proud." Clara finally lowered her rifle, her arms trembling with the release of hours of tension. "My father taught me some things are worth fighting for. Justice is one of them." The sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across what had once been her peaceful homestead. The cabin walls were riddled with bullet holes, the windows shattered, her yard strewn with the dead. It would take months to repair the damage, and longer still to wash away the smell of blood and gunpowder. But she and Ethan were alive. That was enough. Silas Crowley, bound and beaten, was dragged into the root cellar to await federal custody. For the first time since the siege began, Clara allowed herself a deep breath. She had stood against the storm and survived. By dawn, the sky glowed in shades of rose and gold, mocking in its beauty after such violence. Clara sat on the remains of her porch, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the sunrise over the Dakota frontier. Her cabin looked more like a battlefield than a home. 8 bodies lay under canvas sheets from her wagon. The black scars of bullet holes marred the logs, yet she was alive. Ethan Callahan was alive, and the man who had hunted them was locked below, powerless at last. "Riders coming," Ethan said softly behind her. He moved carefully, still favoring his wounded side, but his voice was stronger than it had been since she'd found him bleeding in the forest. Clara's hand drifted to her Winchester, but she relaxed when she recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Amos Turner of Silverton, flanked by a company of federal marshals. Reinforcements had finally arrived. Clara rose to her feet. Whatever came next, repairs, trials, rebuilding her home, she knew one truth: she had proven herself. Against impossible odds, she had defended her land, her life, and the legacy of her father. And in Ethan Callahan, she had found not just an ally, but something far rarer on the frontier, a partner who saw her strength, respected it, and stood beside her as an equal. The battle was over, but Clara Dawson's real adventure was only beginning. "Miss Dawson," Sheriff Amos Turner called as he swung down from his saddle, his weathered face grim as his eyes swept the battlefield that had once been her front yard. "Got word there was trouble out this way. Looks like we're a day late and $1 short." Clara Dawson brushed ash from her sleeve, her voice calm, though her body ached with exhaustion. "We managed. Can't say the same for Silas Crowley and his men." The sheriff let out a low whistle as he moved among the canvas-covered shapes. He lifted a corner here and there, frowning at faces he recognized. Crowley's been a thorn in the side of this territory for years. Never could get anything to stick. Every time we tried, he slipped right through. That's because half the men meant to investigate him were on his payroll, Ethan Callahan said as he stepped from the cabin, a leather satchel under one arm. He handed it to Turner. "Not anymore. There's enough evidence here to clean house from Silverton to Washington." Turner flipped through the papers, his face darkening with every page. "Lord above," he muttered. "Judge Harrison, Sheriff Crawford, even a few of the territorial representatives. How deep does this run?" "Deep enough to explain why honest lawmen kept disappearing," Ethan replied grimly. "Crowley wasn't just taking bribes. He was eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth." While the sheriff and his marshals studied the damning documents, Clara wandered across her broken homestead, taking silent stock of what she'd lost and what could still be saved. Her father's law books were intact, safe behind thick cabin walls. The china her mother had carried west had been shattered, yet the cabin still stood, scarred but not destroyed, and that felt like a metaphor for herself. "Clara," Ethan called gently, "Sheriff Turner wants your statement." For the next hour, she told the tale, finding Ethan bleeding in the forest, Crowley's siege, the long night of gunfire, and the final capture. The federal marshals listened with widening eyes. "Ma'am," one young deputy finally said, shaking his head, "I've been wearing a badge 10 years, and I've never heard the like. taking down Silas Crowley and his whole outfit by yourself." "She wasn't by herself," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady but warm. "We fought together, and she saved my life more than once." Clara felt a quiet heat rise in her chest, not from the praise, but from the respect. Ethan Callahan didn't see her as a woman who'd gotten lucky. He saw her as an equal, a partner forged in fire. By late afternoon, Crowley was shackled and loaded into a prison wagon, his pale eyes watching her with something between hate and reluctant admiration. Sheriff Turner tipped his hat. "Miss Dawson, the governor himself will want to thank you. What you've done here has saved countless lives." "I didn't do it for thanks," Clara replied softly. "I did it because it was right." The sheriff nodded. "Your father would have been proud. Judge Dawson was the most honest man I ever knew. Looks like he raised you the same." When the wagons rolled away, Ethan lingered. Clara found him standing by the simple wooden cross that marked her father's grave on the hill. "Horace Dawson," Ethan read quietly. "Beloved father and faithful servant of justice." Clara's voice softened. He wanted to be remembered as a man who stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy, even when it cost him. "You honored that memory," Ethan said. "What you did here, standing your ground, protecting a stranger, fighting for the truth, that's exactly what he would have done." They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind whispering through the pines. Finally, Ethan turned to her, his brown eyes steady. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honest." "Always," she said. "When this trial is over, when the corrupt are behind bars, I'm going to need a new partner. The Marshal Service is expanding across the Dakota frontier. They're looking for folks who can handle themselves. I can think of no one better." Clara blinked, surprised. "Are you offering me a job?" "Marshal Callahan. I'm offering you a chance to keep fighting for justice," he replied. "You've got skills that can't be taught: courage, grit, a clear head under fire. This land needs people like you." Clara looked out across her homestead. For 4 years, she had carved a life here, planted, built, endured. Yet the last few days had shown her something she hadn't expected, that purpose didn't just come from surviving, but from standing beside someone who shared her fire. "What about this place?" she asked quietly, gesturing to the battered cabin and fields. "Keep it," Ethan said. "Use it as your base. The Marshal Service needs people who know the land, who can vanish into the wilderness when needed. This could be your headquarters as much as your home." Clara walked to the hill's edge. The Dakota frontier stretched before her in golden waves, vast and untamed. Somewhere out there, more men like Crowley waited badges hiding corruption, greed masquerading as authority. But somewhere out there, too, were the innocent, the settlers, farmers, women, and children who needed someone to shield them. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, the lessons of justice and integrity he'd given her since childhood. She squared her shoulders. "I'll think about it," she said, though her heart already leaned toward yes. Ethan gave a faint smile. "That's all I ask." As the sun dipped low, casting fire across the horizon, Clara Dawson knew her fight wasn't over. The siege of her homestead had ended, but a larger battle stretched before her, and for the first time, she wouldn't have to face it alone. "There's something else," Ethan Callahan said softly, stepping closer until he stood beside Clara Dawson on the hill. His voice, usually so steady, carried a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "These past few days, fighting beside you, watching your courage, it's made me realize something. I've been alone a long time, always telling myself justice was enough. But meeting you, Clara, has shown me there's more to life than duty." Clara felt her heart quicken, though she kept her gaze calm. "What are you saying?" "Ethan, I'm saying I'd like the chance to know you better," he replied. "Not just as a partner in the Marshal Service, but as a woman, if you're willing." For a long moment she studied his face. In his eyes, she saw no condescension, no attempt to rescue or tame her. She saw respect, plain and steady, the same respect that had carried them through the storm. Slowly, she nodded. "I think I'd like that." A rare, genuine smile broke across Ethan's face, warming the dusk around them. "So, you'll consider the Marshal Service." Clara looked back at her battered cabin, then at the endless stretch of wilderness that had shaped her. She thought of her father's lessons, of justice carried like a torch through the darkness, and of the man beside her who had proven himself worthy of her trust. "I'll do more than consider it," she said firmly. "When do we start?" 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Silverton buzzed with tension. Clara Dawson, dressed neatly in riding trousers and vest, stood with a deputy's badge pinned proudly to her chest. Beside her, Ethan Callahan stood straight, though the weight of months of work showed in the lines of his face. At the front of the courtroom, Silas Crowley listened stone-faced as the judge pronounced sentence, life in prison for murder, conspiracy, and corruption against the United States government. The network Crowley had built over years collapsed like a rotten barn. 12 officials stripped of office, 7 convicted and sent to prison. The Dakota frontier, once strangled by graft, was finally breathing clean air again. It was the sort of triumph Judge Horace Dawson would have celebrated. Yet for Clara, the greatest satisfaction wasn't the sentence or the headlines. It was knowing she had found her calling. She and Ethan had become true partners in badge and in heart. Together, they rode the rough country, bringing justice where it was scarce and hope where it had been nearly extinguished. Clara Dawson had started as a homesteader alone in the wilderness. Now she was more a guardian of the innocent, a protector who had proven that grit and courage could overcome any odds. The frontier was still wild, still cruel. But it was a little safer now, because Clara Dawson and Ethan Callahan were riding together. And so, in the untamed Dakota wilderness, where danger crouched in every shadow and justice was often delivered at the barrel of a gun, 2 weary souls found something worth fighting for, each other, and the truth that corruption could never fully smother. Clara Dawson proved what courage truly is. It isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right when every instinct screams to run. It's about standing for strangers when no one would fault you for turning away. It's about choosing justice over silence, mercy over safety. When she found that wounded marshal bleeding beneath the autumn pines, Clara faced a choice that would define not only her fate, but the fate of an entire territory. She could have walked away, leaving Ethan to die and retreating to her quiet, solitary life. Instead, she chose to fight against professional killers, against a network of corruption stretching into the highest halls of power, against odds no reasonable soul would have wagered on. And Ethan Callahan learned something too. He learned that sometimes the finest backup doesn't ride under a badge, but carries a shotgun and a lion's heart. He discovered that true partnership isn't about one protecting the other. It's about respect, equality, and the resolve to stand together when the world tries to tear you down. Together. Clara and Ethan showed that justice doesn't always wear a badge, that the strongest warriors are often the ones the world underestimates. They proved that love, built on respect and a shared purpose, could weather any storm the frontier threw their way. As we grow older, stories like Ruby Mitchell's remind us that life is often less about the battles we fight with our hands and more about the choices we make with our hearts. Ruby could have walked away from a wounded stranger, kept her quiet life, and avoided danger. Instead, she chose courage over comfort, justice over silence, and in doing so, she discovered both her true strength and the companionship she never expected. For many of us, the battles we face aren't with bullets or bounty hunters. They come in the form of illness, loneliness, or the difficult decisions we must make for our families. Ruby's journey teaches us that doing what is right, even when it costs us, always leaves a legacy worth more than safety or ease. And just as important, it reminds us that we are never too old, too tired, or too small to make a difference in someone else's life, at 60, 70, or beyond. The frontier we face may look different, but the call is the same: to live with courage, to protect what is good, and to remember that sometimes the smallest act of bravery can change everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Your time and support mean the world to us. If Ruby's story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to help us bring you more stories of courage, justice, and hope. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep believing in what's right.